When I first heard that people in certain corners of the world live far longer than most, I was curious but skeptical. Could there really be a secret to life that hides in some forgotten village, passed down in recipes and rituals rather than textbooks and laboratories? The question led me to the rugged mountains of eastern Sardinia, to a region called Ogliastra, one of the planet's few recognized blue zones, where the proportion of centenarians is astonishingly high. Here, in stone-built villages cradled by steep hillsides and bathed in the smell of sea and rosemary, time seems to move differently. The locals call it la vita lenta, the slow life. But that doesn't mean stillness. It's the rhythm of work, family, laughter, and faith. I arrived expecting serenity, but what I found was something more vibrant. Old men still herding sheep under a blazing sun, women in their 90s kneading dough with strong hands, and elders who laughed like mischievous children. Their eyes, bright and alert, seemed to defy the calendar. I remember my first morning in the village of Villa Grande Strisali, the crisp mountain air carrying the faint clang of bells from grazing sheep. A man in his 90s, whom I later learned was named Antonello, waved from behind the wheel of a dusty pickup truck. He was on his way to milk his flock. I followed the road upward, past stone terraces and olive groves, and began to understand, life here is not just long, it's full. Everywhere I went, I met people who had lived through wars, poverty, and loss, yet their humor and purpose remained intact. If I stop, I die, Antonello told me later, his voice half stern, half amused. It wasn't bravado. It was a statement of philosophy. Work, for them, isn't drudgery. It's the act of staying alive. But longevity here isn't explained by hard work alone. It's written in the closeness of family, in shared meals that stretch long into the evening, in the unspoken faith that life, even in its hardships, is good. It's in the laughter that echoes from one balcony to another, in the tenderness with which a granddaughter adjusts her grandfather's hat before they walk to the square. As I began to meet more of these extraordinary elders, I realized I hadn't just come to learn about how they lived so long. I was here to discover why. Their stories, woven with humility, discipline, and joy, offered something deeper than the pursuit of years. They offered a philosophy of being, a way to stay alive in spirit, long before the body ever begins to fade. And so my journey began, not toward eternal life, but toward understanding what makes life eternal in feeling. After those first encounters, I began to sense that longevity in Sardinia was not merely a matter of genetics or diet, but something far more elemental, something that rose from the ground itself. The island seemed to breathe its own rhythm, one that its people had learned to match over generations. The mountains didn't just surround the villages, they protected them, as though forming a natural cradle for human endurance. The eastern coast of Sardinia, especially the Ogliastra region, is a tapestry of cliffs and deep green valleys. Roads twist like ribbons between limestone peaks, and the sea flashes unexpectedly in the distance, a reminder that even in isolation, there is always light beyond the horizon. Life here feels carved by wind and time. The soil is rocky, the fields stubborn, yet every patch of ground seems to give something back. Olives, grapes, beans, wild herbs. It struck me how much this landscape demanded of its people, and how much it gave in return. The villagers don't fight against the land, they cooperate with it. They rise when the sun does, work with the seasons, and measure time not in hours but in harvests. There's a deep understanding that everything, including the body, has its cycles. This sense of harmony, I realized, wasn't just poetic. It was practical. When you live close to the earth, you learn to accept limits, to move slowly, and to value what endures. In the afternoons, when the heat softened and shadows lengthened across the hills, I would walk through narrow stone alleys. Laundry fluttered like flags of ordinary triumph, and the smell of baking bread drifted from open windows. Every detail, every cracked wall, every wooden door polished by time, told a story of persistence. These were not people who had escaped hardship. They had absorbed it, letting it strengthen rather than break them. I met an old farmer named Luigi who summed it up simply: the land raises you, and you raise it back. His hands were thick and darkened from years of sun and soil, his posture slightly bent, yet powerful. He spoke of the land with affection, like an old friend who sometimes argued but never abandoned him. His small vineyard, planted by his grandfather, still produced enough grapes for the family's wine. "It's not much," he said, "but it's ours. It gives us purpose." That word, purpose, began to echo everywhere I went. The land gave people something to do, something to care for, something that tied each day to the next. It was a quiet but profound antidote to the kind of modern aimlessness I often felt at home, where convenience can make us strangely restless. Between villages, I noticed how few billboards or bright lights there were. Nights in Sardinia are truly dark, not the artificial darkness of city streets, but a natural, velvety one pierced by countless stars. In that silence, you feel the size of your own breath. I understood then why stress seemed almost foreign here. There's no constant noise, no rush of schedules. The pace of life is dictated by the weather, by animals, by ripening fruit. And yet, this is not a static world. People here work hard, brutally hard at times, but there's a softness in their rhythm. They rest when it's hot, they gather to eat, and they laugh easily. It's a balance our modern world often forgets. Effort tempered by grace. Sometimes, as the day faded, church bells would call through the valley, mingling with the distant bleating of goats. That sound, part human, part landscape, felt like the island itself breathing. It wasn't difficult to imagine how someone could live a century here, surrounded by such gentle insistence on balance. I found myself thinking, perhaps longevity is not about stretching time, but about slowing it down until it fits you perfectly. Sardinia seemed to have mastered that art. And as I became more attuned to the rhythm of this place, I began to notice that the people themselves mirrored the landscape, resilient yet tender, shaped by wind and stone yet full of warmth. Nowhere was this harmony clearer than in the life of the shepherd who became both teacher and symbol for me. Antonello, the man who never stopped moving. If the land of Sardinia has a heartbeat, it beats in rhythm with its shepherds. You see them everywhere in the hills, strong-backed men with sun-worn faces, walking beside flocks that look almost like part of the landscape itself. Among them was Antonello, the man I had glimpsed earlier driving his old truck along the mountain road. He was 91 years old, but when I met him properly a few days later, it felt as though I were meeting someone half that age. Not because of how he looked, but because of how alive he seemed to be inside his own skin. Every morning, long before the rest of the village stirred, Antonello would wake to the crow of roosters and the smell of cold air. 6 o'clock sharp, he said. The sheep don't wait for lazy men. He dressed without haste, poured himself a small cup of strong coffee, and drove toward his barn. Watching him, I realized that routine here wasn't monotony. It was devotion, a rhythm that stitched his days into meaning. His flock, about 150 sheep, was more than just livelihood. It was companionship. "They've kept me company all my life," he said, patting one as though it were an old friend. He moved among them with quiet authority, his gestures small but precise. His son Giuseppe, who was 57, often joined him in the mornings. They teased each other constantly, a dance of generations who knew each other's rhythms by heart. Together they would collect around 60 liters of milk each day, which Antonello later turned into pecorino, the hard, aromatic cheese for which Sardinia is famous. I watched as he stirred the curdling milk in a wide copper pot, his hands bare, his movements steady. He didn't use a thermometer, just his fingers and instinct. "The milk tells you when it's ready," he explained, dipping his hand in to test the warmth. "You just have to listen." Listening, that was something Antonello did with everything. To his animals, to the weather, to the quiet of the hills. His whole life was an act of attention. When I asked him if he ever felt tired of working at his age, he laughed, a deep, rolling laugh that came from his chest. "If I stop, I die," he said again, his eyes glinting. "Work keeps me alive. The body needs to move. You sit too much, you rust." He wasn't being metaphorical. Movement was his medicine. While the world I came from measured health by gym memberships and step counters, Antonello measured it in purpose. His work wasn't exercise. It was meaning embodied. Watching him lift a 50-kilo sack of feed onto his shoulder with the strength of a much younger man, I began to wonder whether it was the body that kept the mind sharp, or the mind that refused to let the body slow down. His wife, Maria, still helped him with the cheese-making. She was 86, small and alert, with eyes that missed nothing. Together, they moved around their kitchen with wordless precision. Decades of shared labor turned into choreography. The smell of milk and steam filled the room, and she laughed when Antonello grew dizzy for a moment in the heat. "You always want to do too much," she scolded gently, fanning him with her apron. "You forget your age." He smiled, catching his breath. "Age?" he said, almost scoffing. "Age is for people who have nothing left to do." That sentence lingered in me. I thought of how often, in other places, aging is treated as retreat, a slow surrender of identity. Here, it was the opposite. Old age was participation, continuity. The elders weren't withdrawing from life. They were still living inside it. After the morning's work, Antonello liked to sit outside under the fig tree, a glass of homemade wine in hand. He wasn't a man of indulgence, but he believed in balance. A little wine, good bread, cheese, laughter, and prayer. "Too much of anything," he said, "and you're already sick." His moderation wasn't austere. It was joyful. He knew when to work and when to stop. He knew that food tasted better when shared and that laughter healed faster than medicine. It was this quiet wisdom that seemed to run like blood through every centenarian I met in Sardinia. A discipline rooted not in denial, but in gratitude. One afternoon, I joined Antonello and Giuseppe in their olive grove. The view opened toward the distant sea, and a breeze carried the smell of earth and salt. Giuseppe told me he sometimes worried about his father's stubbornness, the way he refused to rest. But even as he spoke, there was admiration in his voice. "He taught me that if you love your work, it doesn't wear you out," he said. "It keeps you alive." Antonello nodded but added softly, "Love alone is not enough. You must respect what you do. Work must have soul." That word, soul, echoed like a prayer between us. I realized that for Antonello, tending sheep wasn't just an occupation. It was a dialogue with life itself. His every movement carried the patience of someone who knew that meaning comes not from speed or success, but from staying close to the essentials: air, food, animals, family, and faith. As the sun dropped behind the hills, the bells of the flock jingled faintly, like wind chimes of time itself. Antonello stood with his hands on his hips, gazing toward the horizon. "I'll keep going as long as I can," he said, almost to himself. "Maybe another 2 years, maybe 10. Only the Lord knows." In that moment, I understood what made him timeless. It wasn't the years he had survived, but the way he filled them, with movement, with purpose, with humble pride in doing one thing well and doing it every day. When I left his farm that evening, the last thing I saw was Antonello walking slowly up the path toward his house, his figure outlined by the orange light of the setting Sunday. He looked small against the vastness of the landscape, yet somehow eternal, as if the hills themselves had decided to lend him their strength. And as I descended the road back toward the village, I found myself thinking about another elder I was about to meet, a woman whose hands shaped not only food but the spirit of her community. Carolina, the woman who fed a village. If Antonello taught me that work can be a form of worship, Carolina showed me that generosity can be a form of strength. Where he moved through the world with the quiet rhythm of the shepherd's bell, she moved like sunlight, warm, steady, and full of life. I met her one late morning when the air smelled of thyme and fresh dough. Her small kitchen in the village of Arzana was alive with laughter, the clatter of pots and the aroma of something cooking slowly on the stove. Carolina was 91, but she worked at the counter as if time had forgotten her. Her white hair was tied back neatly, her back a little bent, but her movements were assured. Her hands fast and graceful. She was making culurgiones, the traditional Sardinian dumplings filled with potatoes, herbs, and cheese. I watched as she shaped each one with the precision of an artist, pinching the edges into delicate folds that looked like tiny braids. Her sister-in-law, Carla, sat beside her, rolling dough and joking about who still had the better technique. "She always wins," Carla said with mock frustration. "But don't tell her that." Carolina's laughter filled the room like a song. "Come, taste," she said. pushing a steaming dumpling toward me. "You too, if you don't, there'll be trouble." I obeyed, and the flavor was simple and perfect. Earthy potatoes, the brightness of mint, and the salt of local cheese. "It's good, yes?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "This food keeps us young." As she worked, she spoke about her life with the same ease with which she kneaded dough. She'd been widowed 8 years earlier and had raised 3 children. All of them lived nearby, visiting her daily. "They make sure I eat, that I don't fall, that I don't forget," she said with a hint of amusement. "But I still cook for them because what else would I do all day?" Her life hadn't been easy. "We were poor," she told me, her hands still busy. "When there was no work, I made my own. I told my husband, if we want to eat, I'll find a way." She did, first as a painter, balancing on ladders to paint houses, and later as a cleaner. "It was hard, but it was a good life," she said, and I could tell she meant it. Her pride wasn't in what she had achieved, but in what she had endured with grace. I noticed a rosary hanging near the window and asked if she still prayed. "Always," she said, nodding. "Faith is food for the soul. If you don't feed it, you get hungry in ways no bread can fix." That afternoon, Carolina decided to visit the retirement home in the next village. She had baked a basket full of dumplings that morning, enough for the residents there, all older than 90, some past 100. She asked me to come along. The path wound through olive groves and ended at a low white building filled with the murmur of voices and the smell of disinfectant. As we entered, faces lit up. "Ah, Carolina," one woman exclaimed, reaching out her hand. Carolina kissed her cheek. "You didn't think I'd forget you, did you?" she said. She passed out her dumplings one by one, greeting each person by name. The joy in that room was palpable. Not the joy of celebration, but of remembrance, of being seen. In one corner sat Vittorio, 102 years old, the oldest resident. He needed full-time care, but his eyes brightened when Carolina bent to greet him. "Look, I brought you something," she said softly. "You used to love these." He nodded, his lips trembling into a faint smile. When we left, I could see she was holding back tears. Outside, under the wide Sardinian sky, she stopped and said quietly, "It hurts me to see them there. To leave a mother or father in such a place. I couldn't. I want to die in nature, in my home, not among machines." Her words weren't judgmental, they were filled with sorrow. I understood that for her, dignity meant staying woven into the fabric of family and land until the very end. "As long as I have my mind, I'll stay here," she said. "When God decides it's time, He'll find me in my kitchen." As now, her faith wasn't blind submission. It was a quiet pact with life. I watched her light a candle in the small church later that day, one of those stone chapels that seemed to have grown straight out of the hillside. She prayed for the people in the care home, her hands folded, her lips moving silently. The flame flickered, and for a moment, the wrinkles on her face seemed to disappear in the golden light. Walking back, she hummed an old folk tune. "You see," she said, smiling at me, "you must always keep a song inside. That way, when you're sad, it can come out and remind you you're still alive." I thought of how different her kind of strength was from Antonello's. His was physical, grounded in movement and discipline. Hers was emotional, a quiet fire of faith and compassion. Yet both shared the same core truth. You stay alive by giving life away, through work, through care, through love. As the sun dipped low, she sent me home with a small cloth parcel of her dumplings. "For later," she said, "eat them when you miss us." I smiled, not realizing until later that she meant it both literally and spiritually. That night, as I sat on the balcony of my guest house overlooking the glowing hills, I ate her food and thought of her words, of songs, faith, and the kind of generosity that outlives the body. It was then I began to understand why people here call their elders the roots. They nourish everyone else. And yet, as I was soon to discover, there was another centenarian who embodied yet another dimension of longevity, not through work or giving, but through the art of staying joyful. His name was Gioino, and at 100 years old, he still walked to the village square every day, dressed neatly and smiling like a man perpetually ready for life. After spending time with Carolina, I thought I had seen every possible face of long life, the steady strength of the shepherd and the radiant generosity of the homemaker. But then I met Gioino, and I realized there was yet another secret, one that could not be measured by health or habit: joy. He was 100 years old, but when he smiled, he looked like a man in his 40s, mischievous, alert, and utterly present. I first met him as he was preparing to go out. His granddaughter, Juliana, was helping him get dressed for his weekly visit to the village square. "He insists on looking perfect," she told me, brushing invisible dust from his jacket. "He says it's disrespectful to meet people looking half asleep." Gioino stood tall in front of the mirror, his shirt crisp, his shoes polished, his hat tilted just so. "If you look good, you feel good," he said, laughing as he adjusted his collar. Then he looked at me with a wink. "And if you feel good, people treat you like you're not 100 years old." We set off on foot. He refused to take the car, though Juliana had offered, and slowly made our way down the sloping cobbled street toward the main square. His cane tapped lightly on the stones, not as a crutch but as a rhythm stick marking his pace. "I don't need it," he admitted, "but it reminds me I still have somewhere to go." As we walked, everyone seemed to know him. "Buongiorno, Gioino," came greetings from doorways and balconies. He stopped for every one of them, exchanging jokes, asking after grandchildren, sometimes scolding a friend for looking too serious. "Smile," he would say. "We're still here, aren't we?" At the square, a group of old men were already gathered on a bench, arguing cheerfully about football and politics. Gioino joined them like a conductor stepping onto his stage. Within minutes he was teasing one of them about his hairline, then laughing so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. Watching him, I understood something Carolina had told me the day before. "A song in your heart keeps you alive." Gioino was proof of it. Over a small coffee, he told me pieces of his story. He had once run a sheep farm in Umbria with 600 animals. "Hard work," he said, "but good work. You sleep well when your body is tired from honest labor." He had lived through malaria as a young man and never smoked a cigarette in his life. "A glass of wine every day," he admitted, "but only one." When his wife passed away years ago, he continued to live alone, though his family made sure he was never lonely. "They take turns visiting me," he said, showing me a small notepad hanging near the door. "See? It's written whose day it is. I always have company." The list was handwritten in neat script, each name underlined with affection. At night, he told me, he cooked simple meals: pasta, beans, a little cheese. Around 11 or midnight, he went to bed. "I sleep alone," he said with a shrug, "but my dreams are full of people." As the day unfolded, I realized his secret wasn't only his routine, but his attitude. He met every moment with humor and curiosity. When we stopped by the barbershop, he joked with the barber about needing a young man's haircut. "Do you have a girlfriend?" the barber teased. "No," Gioino shot back, "but I'm still accepting applications." The room burst into laughter, and he grinned, delighted by his own punchline. There was no trace of bitterness in him, no complaint about aches, no nostalgia that soured the present. Instead, he carried his memories lightly, as though they were feathers in his pocket. "You can't live in the past," he said. "It's too heavy. I take what was good, leave what was sad, and walk on." "Yes, people." I found myself studying his face, the fine lines like trails of laughter rather than marks of time. He seemed to have turned aging into an art, not by resisting it, but by inhabiting it fully. He dressed well, ate simply, laughed often, and surrounded himself with people. In a world where old age is often associated with withdrawal, he was entirely social, entirely visible. When we walked back to his house later that afternoon, he paused halfway up the hill to catch his breath. "You see," he said, leaning on his cane, "people think getting old is about losing things. But no, it's about keeping what matters. Your pride, your humor, your friends." It struck me then that his laughter wasn't frivolous. It was courage, a form of resilience as vital as Antonello's labor or Carolina's compassion. His joy wasn't denial of age. It was acceptance without surrender. At his doorstep, Juliana was waiting. She kissed his cheek, scolding him gently for staying out too long. "You'll wear yourself out," she said. He grinned, eyes sparkling. "Then I'll rest tomorrow." As the door closed behind him, I thought about the different shades of longevity I had seen so far. Antonello's purpose, Carolina's generosity, and now Gioino's joy, all of them seemed to form parts of a single whole. Together they painted a portrait of a life lived in balance, each day filled with meaning, movement, and affection. And yet, there was one more thread to the tapestry, one that connected these lives not only to tradition but to science itself. For in another village, not far away, an 84-year-old man named Vincenzo and his son were helping researchers uncover what, at a molecular level, might explain Sardinia's secret. What they found would prove that even science, in the end, agrees with the soul of this land. Not far from where Gioino lived stood an olive grove that seemed to shimmer in the sun, rows of trees with silvery leaves that whispered in the wind like an ancient choir. It was there that I met Vincenzo, an 84-year-old farmer who, with his son Ivan, tended 50 olive trees that had been in their family for generations. If Antonello's world smelled of sheep and milk, and Carolina's of bread and herbs, Vincenzo's life was perfumed by olive oil, that golden liquid Sardinians call oro verde, green gold. When I first arrived, he was perched on a low branch, pruning with slow, deliberate movements. Ivan stood nearby, ready to pass him tools. They moved together with an easy rhythm that comes only from years of working side by side. "Cut from below," Vincenzo instructed, pointing to a branch. "You have to give the tree space to breathe." His voice was calm, patient. The sun poured through the branches, dappling his weathered face with light. He reminded me of Antonello in his discipline, but his energy felt gentler, less about endurance, more about harmony. "As long as I can be active," he told me, stepping down carefully, "I feel useful. And when I feel useful, I feel young." I watched as he examined each tree, touching the bark as if checking its pulse. "You see," he said, "trees are like people. They get old, but if you take care of them, if you prune them and give them light, they keep giving fruit." That line stayed with me long after our conversation. It was more than metaphor, it was philosophy. The Sardinians don't just tend to their olive trees, they live by their rhythm. Growth, pruning, rest, renewal. Life reduced to its most natural cycles. Vincenzo and Ivan took me later that afternoon to a small research center in the nearby town, where scientists were studying why people in Sardinia live so long. The two men were part of an ongoing study that collected biological and genetic data from thousands of residents, from young adults to those over 100. Inside the clinic, a doctor named Eduardo Fioro greeted us. He spoke gently, like someone who understood that science, when it deals with human stories, must tread carefully. As he examined Vincenzo, he smiled. "Your arteries look younger than you are," he said. "You could outlive your son if you keep this up." Vincenzo laughed. "He can have the olive trees when I'm done," he said. The doctor explained that genetics do play a role in longevity. They help the body resist disease and maintain cellular balance. But his team had discovered something surprising. After the age of 50, lifestyle becomes far more important than genes. The paradox, he said, is that the older we get, the more control we have. Not less. It's how we live, what we eat, how we connect. The environment takes over. That idea felt revolutionary in its simplicity. I thought of Antonello's daily labor, Carolina's generosity, and Gioino's laughter, each a form of environmental nourishment. Their lives were not about resisting aging, but about living so fully that age became secondary. "Doctor," Fioro continued, "we've learned that the Sardinian diet, the clean air, and the strong social fabric all combine to protect the body. But even more than that, these people have purpose. They wake up knowing they matter." As we left the center, Ivan walked beside his father, his hand resting lightly on the old man's shoulder. "You see," he told me, "I used to think my father would slow down one day, but he never did. He reads, he works, he talks to everyone. He's teaching me that growing old isn't about losing strength, it's about keeping curiosity." I looked at Vincenzo walking ahead, his steps small but steady. His hat cast a shadow across his face, but I could see a faint smile. "Hope dies last," he said suddenly, without turning around. "As long as there's work to do, there's life to live. He wanted as the comes of her." The olive trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sound reminded me of the bells in Antonello's fields, the same rhythm of continuity, the same dialogue between past and present. Science had confirmed what the villagers had always known intuitively. Longevity isn't a mystery. It's the natural result of a life aligned with purpose, motion, and love. That evening, as I left the grove, the setting sun turned the leaves to silver and gold. I realized that these people weren't just living longer, they were living better. Their secret wasn't hidden in DNA, but written in the way they treated each day, as something sacred, simple, and worth showing up for. And as the night deepened, I thought of how they celebrated that philosophy not through sermons or self-help books, but through festivals, gatherings that brought together everything that sustained them: work, family, food, and laughter. In Sardinia, longevity isn't studied in laboratories. It's lived at the table. A few days later, I was invited to what the villagers called La Festa della Tossatura, the festival of sheep shearing, one of Sardinia's oldest rural celebrations. It takes place every summer when the air smells of hay and wildflowers, and people from across the region come together to help, eat, and sing. It's more than just a practical event. It's a ritual of renewal, a reminder that the rhythm of the land still guides human life. The festival was held in a meadow surrounded by olive groves, with long wooden tables stretching under makeshift canopies. Smoke rose from open fires where meat was roasting, and the sound of laughter mingled with the clanging of pots and the soft bleating of sheep waiting nearby. I recognized many faces: Antonello, his son Giuseppe, and even Carolina, who had arrived carrying a basket of her homemade dumplings, insisting everyone eat. "Here, try," she said, pressing a plate into my hands. "You, too, if you don't, there'll be trouble." The line had become her signature. I laughed, and she smiled, satisfied that her food had found another willing soul. There was something profoundly grounding about that day. Men and women worked side by side, shearing sheep, stirring pots, passing bread, pouring wine. Children darted between tables, carrying trays or stealing bits of cheese when no one was looking. No one was excluded. Age didn't separate anyone here. The young leaned close to hear the old tell stories, and the old watched the young with quiet pride, as if passing on the baton of time without words. When the work was done, everyone gathered around the table. The mutton, grilled without sauces or seasonings, was served alongside thick bread, fresh tomatoes, and homemade cheese. A few bottles of local red wine were opened, and the first toast was raised to health and good company. I sat between Antonello and Vincenzo, who were discussing olive yields with the same enthusiasm as boys comparing trophies. Carolina, across the table, was teaching a group of teenagers how to fold dough properly for courgettes. And Gioino, impeccably dressed as always, clinked glasses with whoever was nearest, his laughter rising above the chatter like music. Looking around, I saw 4 generations sharing the same meal, great-grandparents beside their great-grandchildren, stories intertwining like vines. It was as if the table itself had become a living metaphor for what sustained them: connection. Someone began to sing an old Sardinian folk song, slow and rhythmic, and others joined in until the air vibrated with harmony. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was raw, full of life. For a moment I felt I was witnessing something eternal. Humanity distilled into its purest form: work, food, music, and belonging. Later, as the sun dipped low, turning the hills gold, I walked a little away from the noise. From the distance, the scene looked timeless. Smoke curling upward, laughter echoing, people swaying to a song that might have been sung 100 years ago. I thought of what Vincenzo had said: as long as there's work to do, there's life to live. Here, I saw that same truth extended. As long as there's someone to share it with, life multiplies. Modern life often teaches us that celebration is an escape, a break from responsibility. But in Sardinia, it's the opposite. Celebration is how they honor responsibility, how they renew their bond with the land, the family, and the generations that came before. The festival was not a pause from life. It was life, concentrated. When night finally fell, stars appeared one by one over the dark silhouette of the mountains. The music softened, and people began to say their goodbyes, each farewell a gentle promise to meet again soon, to keep the thread unbroken. As I walked back through the cool night, the air full of the scent of wood smoke and herbs, I realized that these gatherings are the truest medicine of all. They heal what solitude cannot, reminding everyone, even a visitor like me, that we belong somewhere, to someone. And as the last echoes of laughter faded into the dark, I found myself thinking not of how long these people lived, but of how completely they lived. Their lives weren't measured in years, but in moments of shared joy. I knew then that my journey through Sardinia was nearing its end, but the lessons were only beginning to take root. Soon, I would return home changed, carrying with me not the secret of eternal life, but something infinitely more precious: the art of living well. That night after the festival, as I sat alone beneath the Sardinian stars, I found myself thinking about everything I had witnessed: the laughter, the labor, the faith, the food, and above all, the faces of those who had lived more than a century without losing their spark. I had come searching for the secret of eternal life, but what I found instead was a philosophy of living deeply. In the beginning, I thought longevity might be about physical discipline, eating right, exercising, avoiding excess, and yes, all of that mattered. Antonello, with his strong arms and tireless work ethic, had shown me that movement keeps the body young. If I stop, I die, he had said, not as a warning, but as a truth. He taught me that motion is not just physical, it's emotional, spiritual. You must keep moving toward something you love, even if it's just a daily routine that gives your life shape. Then came Carolina, whose energy came not from motion but from meaning. Her life revolved around feeding others, her family, her neighbors, even the forgotten residents of the care home. Through her, I learned that giving doesn't deplete us, it restores us. She had turned her kitchen into a sanctuary, her faith into fuel. You must always keep a song inside, she told me, and I began to understand that inner music, that quiet sense of purpose, is what keeps the heart young long after the body begins to age. And then there was Gioino, the centenarian who still dressed sharp and walked to the square every morning. From him, I learned that joy is resistance. His laughter wasn't mere cheerfulness, it was strength, a deliberate refusal to let age become an excuse for dullness or despair. He didn't live in nostalgia or complaint. You can't live in the past, he said. It's too heavy. Instead, he carried his memories lightly, wearing his years as a medal, not a burden. Watching him taught me that a sense of humor may be the purest form of wisdom. Vincenzo, meanwhile, grounded all those lessons in a kind of quiet realism. His olive trees and his words reminded me that aging is not decline, but adaptation. If you take care of the tree, he told me, it keeps giving fruit. Science agreed with him. The researchers showed that while genetics play their part, the real secret lies in how we live after 50, how we move, what we eat, how we connect, how we breathe. And in Ogliastra, everyone seems to live by those unspoken rules. Together, these elders revealed something profound. Longevity is not a formula. It's a way of being. It is shaped by rhythm, rooted in connection, and carried by gratitude. Their lives were not free of pain or hardship, but they were defined by an ability to keep going, to keep loving, working, giving, and laughing, no matter what life took away. I began to notice how different this was from the culture I came from, a world obsessed with extending life, even when it has forgotten how to live. We build technologies to track our heart rates but ignore the hearts of others. We chase youth as if it were a prize, when perhaps youthfulness is not a stage of life at all, but a state of engagement. In Sardinia, no one speaks about anti-aging. They simply live with age, respectfully, gracefully, even humorously. They celebrate wrinkles as proof of having smiled enough. They take care of their bodies not out of vanity, but out of reverence for the life that still flows through them. By the end of my journey, I realized that the so-called secrets of longevity weren't hidden in Sardinia's mountains. They were right in front of me, woven into daily gestures. The way Antonello lifted a cheese wheel, the way Carolina folded her dough, the way Gioino tipped his hat to everyone he met, the way Vincenzo pruned his olive trees with patience. The secret, if there is one, is not about adding years to life, but adding life to years, filling each day with purpose, movement, connection, and laughter. It's about showing up fully, again and again, until time itself becomes something softer, slower, more human. And as I prepared to leave the island, I understood that I hadn't just been studying longevity. I had been learning how to live well, how to wake up each morning grateful for the simple fact of being alive, and how to walk, slowly but surely, toward the square of my own life. When I left Sardinia, the mountains faded slowly in the rear-view mirror, their slopes glowing gold in the morning light. It struck me then how everything on the island seemed to exist in balance: age and youth, work and rest, laughter and silence. I realized that I wasn't taking with me a list of longevity tips. I was carrying a way of seeing. The Centenarians had shown me that life's true measure isn't in numbers or achievements, but in presence. They didn't strive to live forever. They simply refused to stop living. Their days were shaped by attention, by the kind of mindfulness that doesn't come from meditation apps or workshops, but from years of being close to what is real: soil, wind, family, food, and faith. Antonello's strength, Carolina's kindness, Gioino's humor, Vincenzo's serenity. Each was a verse in a longer song about what it means to belong fully to one's life. They taught me that aging isn't a thief, but a teacher. It strips away what is unnecessary, leaving behind what truly matters. Back home, I found myself slowing down, cooking more, worrying less, taking longer walks, calling my family more often. I realized that eternal life isn't a miracle reserved for a few blessed souls in mountain villages. It's a choice we make daily. To be present, to be kind, to stay curious, to keep loving, despite everything. In the end, perhaps the secret of Sardinia's centenarians isn't that they live longer, but that they live better, not by escaping time, but by filling it so completely that it loses its power to frighten them. And as I remember their faces, their laughter, and the shimmering hills of Ogliastra, one thought stays with me. Maybe eternal life isn't about the number of days we have, but about how deeply we live each one.